Right now, as your eyes move across this line, something is carrying you forward that you have never once been able to stop, slow, or even properly look at. It was already moving before you were born, and it will keep moving long after the last thought leaves your mind. You cannot touch it, cannot store it, cannot run out and buy more of it when it runs low, and yet it is the single most certain fact of your existence, more certain than the ground beneath you, more certain than your own name. We call it time, and almost everyone assumes it is the simplest thing in the world. The strange part, the part that almost no one outside a few quiet rooms in a few research institutes ever hears, is this: the men and women who have spent their entire lives studying it, the ones who write the equations and run the machines that measure it down to fractions no human could ever feel, have slowly and quietly arrived at a conclusion that unsettles them deeply. The closer they look at time, the less there seems to be there. They keep digging for the foundation, the bedrock, the solid floor everyone assumes must be underneath, and instead of stone they keep finding open air. If a journey into one of the deepest mysteries in all of science is something you want to take with us, a quick like and a subscribe would mean more than you know. Let us begin the way any honest search should begin, by trying to say what the thing actually is. Stop for a moment and try to define time without secretly leaning on the word itself, without saying when, or duration, or moments, or anything that quietly assumes the very thing you are trying to explain. Try it, and you will feel your mind close around empty space. You will reach for words and find that every one of them already contains time folded inside it, like trying to lift yourself off the floor by pulling on your own belt. This is not a failure of your education or your intelligence. It is a wall that has stopped every mind that ever pressed against it, including the greatest ones who ever lived. Centuries ago, one of the most brilliant thinkers in human history sat down to build the foundations of physics itself. He gave us the laws that describe how objects move, how forces work, how planets sweep around their stars. With those laws, later generations built bridges that still stand, sent machines beyond the atmosphere, and predicted the positions of worlds decades in advance. He could explain almost anything that moved, and when he turned to time, he wrote, in effect, that time simply flows on its own, evenly, from its own nature, without any relation to anything outside it. Read slowly. That is not a definition at all. It is a beautifully dressed shrug. To say that time flows from its own nature is to say nothing about what it is, only that it does what it does, because that is what it does. He treated time the way you treat the floorboards of a house you have lived in for years. You walk across them without a thought. You trust them completely. You never once ask what lies beneath, because the question feels childish and unnecessary. The floor is simply there. Time is simply there. But not everyone was willing to let the question rest. A contemporary of his, another towering intellect, read those confident words and pushed on the one soft spot. If time flows, he asked, then flows relative to what? A river flows past its banks. A runner moves relative to the road. One clock runs fast or slow only when measured against another clock. Everything that moves, moves with respect to something else. So when we say time itself flows, against what background is it moving? The first thinker had no answer. His defenders had no answer. The two sides exchanged a series of letters, some of the sharpest reasoning ever committed to paper. And at the end of all of it, the question stood exactly where it had started, untouched, unanswered, and quietly set aside. Physics did what physics often does when it meets a wall. It walked around. It treated time as a fixed stage on which all the interesting events take place, and it simply stopped asking what the stage was made of. Generation after generation built towering achievements on top of a word that no one had ever defined. And this thinker was not even the first to try. More than 2,000 years before, in a sunlit city famous for its philosophers, another great mind attempted the same thing and produced an answer so clean and so simple that it satisfied the world for the better part of 2 millennia. He said that time is the measure of motion, the count of change. If something moves from here to there, you can measure how long the journey takes, and that measurement is time. A stone falls, a shadow crawls across a wall, a pulse beats in your wrist. You count the beats, and you call the count time. For 20 centuries, this felt like solid ground. It felt like a floor a person could stand on without worry. Then, just over a century ago, a young man working a quiet job in a patent office published a handful of pages that bent that ancient floor nearly in half. He showed that motion and time are not two separate things that can be measured against each other from a safe distance. They are tangled, braided, inseparable. The faster an object moves, the slower its own clock ticks compared to one that stayed behind. Speed reaches into the flow of time and changes its rate. But here is the trap that snaps shut the moment you notice it. Motion is distance divided by time. So motion depends on time. And now time depends on motion. The old definition, time is the measure of motion, has eaten its own tail. You ask what time is, and the answer points you to motion. You ask what motion is, and the answer points you back to time. It is a closed loop, a circle with no door, like opening a dictionary to find a word defined entirely by itself. More than 2,000 years separate that sunlit city from the young man in the patent office. Empires rose and fell in the gap. Whole continents were charted. The speed of light was pinned down. The atom was cracked open. And in all that time, the definition of time itself advanced by exactly nothing. The same loop the ancients walked is the loop we are still walking now. So you might think, fairly, that the thinkers who came afterward, the ones armed with particle accelerators and quantum theory and instruments that can photograph the shadow of a black hole, surely one of them solved it. Surely somewhere in the last 100 years someone reached the bottom. Consider one of the most respected physicists of the modern age, a man who gave us the very name we use for the darkest objects in the cosmos, who guided some of the finest minds of his generation, who helped write the definitive text on the geometry of space and time. If anyone alive had the tools to answer the question, it was him. And when he was asked, plainly, what time is, his reply was a single light remark. Time, he said, is what keeps everything from happening all at once. It lands like a joke, because it is one. A lifetime spent at the absolute center of theoretical physics, able to describe how the universe bends and stretches and collapses. And when handed the simplest possible question, the kind a curious child might ask, the kind that asks what his own equations are actually about, he answered with a one-liner and a smile. Now travel back many centuries to a scholar in the ancient world who sat down to write a deeply personal book, and in the middle of it paused on this exact question. What then is time? He wrote. If no one asks me, I know perfectly well. But if someone asks me to explain it, I find I cannot. A man with parchment and ink, and a man with a particle accelerator, separated by a vast gulf of history, gave the same answer, wore the same expression, fell into the same silence where a definition was supposed to be. This is not a small gap that science is slowly, patiently closing. It is a wall, The people who understand the workings of the universe more deeply than anyone alive cannot tell you what the most ordinary feature of your day actually is. Not because they have been lazy, not because they have not tried with everything they have, but because every road leads back into the same loop, or trails off into a joke, or ends in an honest confession of not knowing. The thing that divides breakfast from evening, birth from death, this heartbeat from the next, has no definition. Not a rough one, not an incomplete one, none at all. But perhaps a definition is the wrong tool for the job. Think about color. You cannot truly define the color red to someone who has been blind since birth. You can talk all day and never transfer the experience, and yet you can measure it perfectly. You can name the exact wavelength of light and pin it down to a number with no ambiguity at all. You do not need to know what red is, in some deep philosophical sense, in order to measure it with breathtaking precision. And measuring time, it turns out, is something we have become almost supernaturally good at. We long ago tied the definition of a single second to the steady internal rhythm of a particular kind of atom, counting an enormous, precise number of its oscillations, and calling that 1 second. That number is not a tidy round figure, because nature did not hand us a tidy round figure. It is exactly as ragged and exact as the atom that produces it. And every atom of that kind, anywhere in the universe, vibrates at precisely the same rate. It does not drift. It does not wear out. It does not care whether it sits in a laboratory or hurtles through space at a fraction of the speed of light. The count comes out the same. The clocks built on this principle became almost unbelievably fine. The best of them are so precise that if one had started running at the birth of the universe and ticked steadily through every age since, it would have drifted by less than a single second across all that time. They are so sensitive that lifting one a few centimeters higher off the ground is enough to change the rate it measures, because the pull of gravity is a hair weaker up there, and the clock can feel the difference across the width of your own hand. Sit with that. We have built machines that can detect time bending across a span shorter than your forearm. And now, ask the question that turns the whole triumph strange. What, exactly, are these miraculous machines counting? They are counting vibrations. They are counting the steady flickers of an atom between two states, over and over. They are not counting time. They are counting a process and pinning the name time onto the tally. The word second is a label we drape over a certain number of atomic shivers. The shivers are real. The label is ours. We have measured time more precisely than almost anything else in the history of science, and we still cannot say what we are measuring. The ruler is flawless. The understanding behind it is simply gone. It is worth pausing on how long and how desperately our kind has tried to pin this thing down, because the effort stretches back almost as far as memory itself. Long before anyone wrote an equation, people watched a shadow crawl across the ground and learned to read the day in it, dividing the bright hours by the slow swing of darkness across a stone. They watched water drip from one vessel into another and counted the falling drops, trusting that the steady leak would carry them faithfully from 1 hour to the next. They burned marked candles and knotted cords and tracked the slow wheel of stars overhead, always reaching for some dependable rhythm to lash their lives to. And every single one of these devices did the same quiet thing. It took a process that moved on its own and treated that movement as a stand-in for the thing itself. The shadow was not time. The dripping water was not time. They were merely things that changed at a pace people had learned to trust. And onto that change a name was draped. Even then, without knowing it, our ancestors were already doing exactly what the most advanced laboratories do today. They were counting a process, and calling the count time, never once touching the thing underneath. As the centuries turned, the obsession only sharpened. People built towers crowned with great wheels of brass and iron, machines of weights and gears that chimed across whole cities and pulled scattered villages into a shared rhythm. For the first time, strangers far apart could agree on the hour, could promise to meet, could coordinate their lives around a common beat. And yet something subtle was lost in the gaining. Before the machines, time had belonged to the sky and the season, to the slant of light and the length of the shadow, a living thing that stretched in summer and shrank in winter. The machines flattened it into something rigid and uniform, the same length everywhere, indifferent to the sun. People began, more and more, to feel that they were serving the clock rather than the clock serving them, that this invisible thing they had tried to capture had somehow captured them instead. The tool meant to measure the current had become a current of its own, dragging everyone along in step. And here is the quiet irony that runs through the whole long story. With every improvement, every finer gear and steadier rhythm and more precise atom, we grew more and more certain that we had mastered time, that we had it cornered and counted and tamed. But mastery of measurement is not the same as understanding. A person can weigh something to the last grain without having the faintest idea what the substance truly is. We polished our rulers to a perfection that would have seemed like sorcery to those who first read shadows on the ground. And across all those ages of refinement, the one question that mattered most stayed exactly as unanswered as it had ever been. We learned to count the thing more and more exquisitely, and we never once learned what we were counting. So you grab for the next handhold, the obvious one. Fine, you say. Nobody can define it. And the clocks are only counting atomic flickers. And the word itself is just a tag we invented. But time clearly does something. It moves. It goes one way. Coffee left alone grows cold and never warms itself back up. A dropped cup shatters and never gathers itself off the floor. People grow older and never younger. Yesterday is gone for good and tomorrow is on its way, and there is a direction running through all of it that you can feel in your bones. The arrow of time. It is the most dependable thing in your whole experience. Whatever time is, surely it at least points somewhere. Except, in the deepest laws we have ever found, it does not. Here is the part that almost no one is told. The fundamental laws of physics, the ones that govern how particles push and pull and dance, are very nearly indifferent to the direction of time. Take the equations that describe how charged particles and light behave, and run them backward, and every solution still works perfectly. Take the central equation of the quantum world, the one that governs the behavior of the smallest things, and reverse the flow of time, and the mathematics plays out just as cleanly in either direction. Take the great theory of gravity and curved space, and a planet looping around its star looks exactly correct whether you run the film forward or in reverse. Every fundamental law we have ever discovered works both ways. Forward and backward are perfect mirror images in the underlying mathematics. The arrow you feel, the one that turns eggs into breakfast and never breakfast back into eggs, is simply not written anywhere in the basic code of reality. Let that sink in, because it is genuinely strange. You live your entire life moving in one direction only. Every cell in your body ages one way. Every memory you carry points backward, never forward. And the laws that govern the very atoms inside those cells, the electrical pulses inside those memories, have no direction at all. They cannot tell forward from backward. You can. They cannot. So where does the arrow come from? The answer that physics found is subtle, and it is one of the most beautiful and most disturbing ideas in all of science. The arrow comes from probability, from the simple, brutal arithmetic of how many ways there are for things to be arranged. Picture a single grain of sand sitting in the exact center of a perfectly smooth table. There is essentially one way for that to happen. Now sweep your hand across the table and scatter 1,000 grains. There are countless arrangements that all count as scattered, as messy, as spread out, and almost none that count as neatly stacked. The universe does not secretly prefer chaos. It does not choose disorder out of spite. It is just that disorder has so much more room. There are vastly, overwhelmingly more ways for things to be jumbled than to be tidy. So whenever anything changes at all, it almost certainly drifts toward the jumble, simply because the jumble is where nearly all the possibilities live. That drift is the arrow. That is the direction. Heat spreads out from a hot cup into a cool room because there are far more ways for the warmth to be scattered than gathered. A drop of ink unfurls through a glass of water and never gathers itself back into a drop, because the spread out states vastly outnumber the concentrated ones. You grow older because there are so many more arrangements of your body that count as worn down than as freshly whole. For the first time, the arrow had a mechanism. The thinker who first wrote this into mathematics had, it seemed, finally given the direction of time a reason. But he was not a man who stopped at the surface. He followed his own idea downward, the way you follow a crack in a wall to see where it leads. And what he found at the bottom of the crack was not solid ground. It was a hole. Because if disorder explains the arrow, then the arrow is not a law in itself. It is a consequence. A consequence of one thing above all. The starting point for everything to be spreading out now, for disorder to be climbing in every direction we look. The universe must have begun in a state of extraordinary order, everything packed and arranged just so, every possibility of mess still waiting in the future. From that exquisitely ordered beginning, things have been coming apart ever since, and that long coming apart is exactly what we feel as the passage of time. But that only pushes the mystery back a step and makes it worse. Why did the universe begin so ordered? What arranged it that way? What law demanded that it start clean rather than already scrambled? He searched for that reason for the rest of his life. He built whole new branches of physics along the way, tools we still use every single day. And he never found it. Every path he walked led back to the same hole. The ordered beginning is assumed, not explained. Written in by hand. Taken on faith as a starting rule, never derived from anything deeper. The man who gave the arrow its equation could not find the ground that equation was meant to stand on, and that ground is still missing today. For the better part of a century, the hole just sat there. Physicists walked carefully around its edge. They used the equations. They taught the idea. They built entire careers on the arrow he had described, but almost no one looked straight down into the gap. When someone finally did, and named it plainly, the name made the problem impossible to ignore. The great law that says disorder always increases, the law that hands time its direction, only works if you bolt on one extra assumption that nothing inside the law can justify. The universe had to begin in a state of staggeringly low disorder. That is not a conclusion you reach by reasoning. It is not something the equations hand you. It is an extra rule you must simply accept before the whole machine will run. Without it, the arrow has no place to start from. Without it, your coffee has no reason to cool. And then someone asked how likely that pristine beginning actually was. One of the most respected mathematical minds in physics worked out the odds. asking out of all the possible ways the universe might have started, how rare is the kind of orderly beginning that produces the era we live inside? The answer is a number so vanishingly small that the human mind cannot hold it. It is not large in any ordinary sense. It is large in a way that breaks the meaning of the word. The number describing how improbable that beginning was has more digits in it than there are particles in everything we can see. You could not write it out, even if you used the entire visible cosmos as your sheet of paper. That is the odds of the one starting condition that makes your coffee cool, that makes your memories point backward, that makes your body age in a single direction. The whole arrow of time, the most reliable feature of your life, balances on a coincidence so unlikely that the number measuring its improbability will not fit inside the universe the coincidence created. And no one knows why it happened. No law forces it. No equation predicts it. You are simply asked to accept it. The floor beneath the arrow is not thin. It is not cracked. It is not there. But maybe, some thinkers said, the floor was never supposed to be there. Maybe the entire question is upside down. One bold proposal turned the whole problem on its head by suggesting that the universe did not begin in a state of perfect order at all. Perhaps it began in the opposite condition, fully spread out, completely settled, no structure, no difference between here and there, hot and cold, this and that. A state where nothing happens because there is nothing left to even out. That sounds less like a beginning and more like an ending, and that is exactly the point. In this picture, the universe starts at the bottom rather than the top, and out of that featureless calm, by sheer random fluctuation, small pockets of order can bubble into being. Not one pocket, but pairs of them, each unfurling in opposite directions, like two streams running off a ridge poured at the same spot. In one direction, disorder climbs the way we call forward, and that branch is our universe, our arrow, our future. In the other direction, disorder climbs the other way, and anyone living in that other branch would feel their arrow pointing the opposite way, would remember what we would call the future, and walk toward what we would call the past, and would feel utterly, perfectly normal doing it. Neither branch is the true one. Neither arrow is the real direction. Both are simply local, accidents of where you happen to stand. You feel time moving forward not because the universe has a built-in direction, but because you are standing in one arm of a structure that has two, and from where you stand, your way looks like the only way. The arrow is not carved into reality. It is the view from your particular seat. So the arrow is not a law. It is a local accident, a feature of position. The direction you call forward might be someone else's backward. But surely one thing survives all of this untouched. This moment, the present. Right now, the words landing in your mind as you read them. Whatever time turns out to be, whatever direction it does or does not point, surely the present moment is real. It is the one thing you cannot argue your way out of. You are in it. Except, when you look closely, you are not even in that. More than a century ago, those same handful of revolutionary pages that bound motion and time together also quietly dismantled the idea of now. The discovery was about simultaneity, about what it means for two things to happen at the same time. And it showed that two events which happen at the same instant for you do not happen at the same instant for someone moving past you. This is not a trick of slow signals or delayed perception. It is built into the structure of reality. Picture two flashes of light, one off to your left and one off to your right, reaching you at the very same instant. To you, they are simultaneous, no question. Now picture someone gliding past you at tremendous speed in the same moment. Because they are rushing toward one flash and away from the other, the light from the two flashes reaches them at different times. For them, one flash clearly happened first and the other second. And here is the blade that cuts the floor away. Neither of you is wrong. There is no test you can run, no experiment you can perform that proves your version is the true one. There is no master clock hanging in the sky recording the real order of events for everyone. Your now is yours. Their now is theirs. Both are completely real, both completely valid, and no law of physics steps in to crown one of them as correct. The present moment is not a feature of the universe. It is a feature of how fast you happen to be moving. Change your speed, and you change your now. The thing you believed was the most solid ground imaginable, this very instant, turns out to depend on your velocity through space. If there is no single universal now, then what does the whole of reality look like to something that could somehow take it all in at once? Not from inside one moment, not from one speed, but from above, the entire thing, past and present and future together. A mathematician who had once taught that young patent clerk realized something the younger man had not yet fully seen. Space and time are not two separate things at all. They are a single woven structure, one four-dimensional fabric. He said it plainly, that from then on space alone and time alone were destined to fade into shadows, and only a union of the two would hold any independent reality. Think about what that union implies. A city exists all at once. The far side of it does not blink out of existence just because you are standing on the near side. The street you walked yesterday is still there. The street you will walk tomorrow is already there. You do not imagine the city being freshly built in front of you as you go and destroyed behind you as you leave. It simply is. All of it. Together. The block universe says exactly that about time. Your birth is in the structure. Your death is in the structure. This very moment is in the structure. And so is every moment before it, and every moment after. All equally real, none more present than any other. The feeling that you are sliding through time, that the past is gone and the future has not yet come, is not a feature of the structure itself. It is a feature of you, a single thread drawn through a vast four-dimensional object, experiencing that thread one point at a time, because that is simply what it is like to be a thread inside the weave. But the weave itself does not move. It does not flow. It does not tick. It simply is. Complete and entire. Every moment you will ever live already there. The way every page of a closed book already exists. You are not writing the story. You are reading it. And the book was bound before you opened the cover. That can sound like nothing more than a lovely idea. A picture drawn on a chalkboard with no claim on the real world. But the strangeness was tested, carried out of the realm of thought and into the air. Some of the finest clocks ever built were placed aboard ordinary aircraft, the kind that carry passengers and serve drinks at altitude, and flown around the world in opposite directions, while an identical set of clocks stayed behind on the ground. When the travelers landed, and the numbers were compared, the flying clocks no longer agreed with the ones that had stayed home. The clocks that had moved had quietly slipped to a slightly different reading, not from any malfunction, not from turbulence or temperature, but because time itself had genuinely passed at a different rate, for objects moving at a different speed and resting at a different height. Those clocks came back from a present that was a sliver out of step with the one on the ground. You could hold the difference in your hands and read it off a dial. The gap is tiny at the speed of an airplane, far too small to feel. But it is not zero. And if it is not zero there, imagine what it becomes for something moving at nearly the speed of light. The sliver widens into years, into decades. The present is not shared. It is personal. It depends on where you are and how fast you are going. And the proof rode home in the cabin of a passenger jet. You carry a quieter version of this proof in your pocket every single day. The system that lets a phone know where it stands on the surface of the Earth relies on a fleet of satellites circling high overhead, each one carrying its own precise clock, and every one of those clocks ticks at a slightly different rate than the clock in your hand. Two effects pull on them at once. Being higher up, where the planet's pull is gentler, makes their clocks run a touch faster. Racing along their orbits at tremendous speed makes their clocks run a touch slower. The two effects do not cancel, and what remains is a small but real daily difference between time up there and time down here. It sounds trivial, a few millionths of a second a day. But the entire positioning system depends on those clocks staying honest. If the difference were ignored, the location your phone reported would drift. A little the first day, more the next, until within a week it would place you in the wrong city entirely. So the engineers correct for it. They build the gap between two versions of the present directly into the system, adjusting for the fact that time on orbit and time on the ground simply do not run together. Every map you have ever followed, every blue dot that ever showed you where you stood, is the quiet result of someone compensating for the difference between your now and the satellite's now. Billions of people lean on this every day, without ever knowing that the machine in their pocket is constantly correcting for a truth most people refuse to consider: that now is not the same everywhere. That it depends on where you are and how strongly gravity tugs on you. Push that small daily difference to its limit, and it stops being a curiosity and becomes something that could break a heart. Imagine a traveler who could ride a craft moving at very nearly the speed of light, out toward some distant star and back again. For that traveler, the journey might feel like a handful of years. The clock on the wall would tick at its ordinary pace. Meals would come and go. A beard would grow. A few birthdays would pass. Nothing about the passage of time would feel even slightly wrong. But the rate at which time flowed for that traveler would have fallen far out of step with the rate back home. While only a few years slipped by inside the craft, decades, even centuries, could pour past on the world left behind. The traveler would return still young, still carrying the same recent memories, to find that everyone known and loved had long since grown old and gone. The children waved off at departure would be elders now, if they lived at all. The streets would have changed names. The traveler would step back onto a world that had aged generations, while their own body aged only a season, and there would be no error anywhere, no malfunction, no illusion. Both clocks would be telling the perfect truth. They would simply have been measuring two different flows of the same thing. This is not a fable. It is the plain consequence of what those flying clocks already proved on a smaller scale, scaled up to speeds we cannot yet reach but that nature permits, and it tears the last comfort out of the idea of a shared present. If two people can part, travel different paths, and reunite having lived through wildly different amounts of time, then there is no universal river carrying everyone along together at the same pace. Each of us moves through our own current, and how fast that current runs depends on how we move and where we stand. Most of the time, the differences are so small we live our whole lives without ever sensing them. All of us close enough in speed and in our position within the planet's gravity to share what feels like a single common now. But the sharing is an approximation, a happy accident of all of us being roughly still and roughly together. The deeper truth is that no two things anywhere are guaranteed to agree on how much time has passed between two meetings. The present we imagine we all inhabit is a convenient fiction that holds only because none of us has yet flown fast enough or far enough to shatter it. So the world outside has been taken apart. Time has no definition. Its direction is an accident of where you stand. The present depends on your speed and your altitude, but there is still one last refuge where time feels undeniably real, and that is inside your own head. Close your eyes and you can feel it. A current. A flow. The sense that this instant is happening, and then slipping away as the next arrives. Whatever the equations say, whatever the clocks measure, you experience time passing, and that experience is the most immediate thing you own. And yet here too, careful experiments have cracked the inside open, the way relativity cracked the outside. Consider what happens when someone is asked to make a simple, free choice, to move a hand whenever they feel like it, while their brain activity, the moment of their decision, and the motion itself are all measured at once. The order feels obvious from inside. You decide, then your brain acts, then your hand moves. Decision first, then the body follows. But the measurements tell a different story. The brain begins preparing the movement before the person is aware of having decided anything. The machinery starts rolling first, and only afterward does the feeling of having chosen arrive in conscious awareness. Your brain begins the action, and then tells you that you chose it. The sequence you live through, the one where the decision comes first, is not what actually happened. It is a reconstruction, assembled after the fact, and handed to you with a timestamp quietly moved backward, so the story feels right. You are not making your choices in the live present. You are being informed, a beat late, of choices already underway, and the notification has been edited to feel like the original moment. And that is only the beginning, because even the simple sense of now is not a single instant, but a careful piece of editing. Your brain does not receive the world in one clean piece. It arrives in fragments. Light reaches your eyes. Sound reaches your ears. Touch reaches your skin. Each of these signals travels to the brain along a different route at a different speed. A touch on your face reaches the brain sooner than a touch on your foot, simply because the distance is shorter. The differences are not tiny. Across the senses and across the body, they can span a meaningful fraction of a second. And yet you never experience a jumble. You do not see a glass break and then hear it shatter half a beat later. You experience both together, in one seamless present, because your brain waits. It holds the fast signals back until the slow ones catch up, then stitches them into a single smooth moment and presents it to you as the live now. You are never experiencing what is happening this instant. You are experiencing what happened a fraction of a second ago, gathered up, smoothed over, and delivered to your awareness as though it were live. You can even catch the seams. Glance suddenly at a ticking clock, and the first second often seems to hang there a touch too long before the rhythm settles. During the flick of your eyes, the brain had no stable image to work with, so it took the first clear frame it received afterward and quietly stretched it backward in time to paper over the gap, pasting that image across the blank moment. You are not watching time directly. You are watching a reconstruction your brain built out of fragments and sewed together with thread that is not really there. Push a little further. When people press a button that causes a sound a moment later and are asked to report exactly when each thing happened, they get it wrong in a very particular way. They feel they pressed the button slightly later than they truly did, and heard the sound slightly earlier than it truly came. The brain pulls the cause and the effect toward each other, shrinking the gap, sliding the two events closer in time, as if it wants the connection to feel tight and immediate. It does not passively watch the link between what you do and what follows. It actively edits that link, deciding the two belong together, and then adjusting the timestamps to make the bond feel stronger. You flip a switch, the light comes on, and it feels instantaneous, though there was a real gap your brain quietly closed, because a tight sense of cause and effect is more useful to you than an accurate one. Scale that up across your whole life, and every time you feel that one thing caused another, you are not simply detecting a fact about the world. You are watching your brain build a relationship and lay it gently over the raw data. Cause and effect as you live them are not pure discoveries. They are productions. Your mind is not a camera faithfully recording events. It is an editing room that decides what the story is and then cuts the footage to match. And there is one more layer to all of this, perhaps the most intimate of all. Because it touches the past itself as you carry it. You feel that your memories are recordings, faithful little films of things that truly happened, stored away and waiting to be played back. But memory does not work like a recording at all. Each time you recall something, you do not retrieve a fixed file. You rebuild the scene from fragments, and in the rebuilding you quietly change it, blending in things you learned later, smoothing over gaps with plausible invention, coloring the whole thing with how you feel right now rather than how you felt then. A memory recalled often is a memory steadily reshaped, a copy of a copy of a copy, drifting a little further from the original with every visit. The past you believe you remember is, in part, a story your mind keeps rewriting and then presenting back to you as though it had never been touched. And the felt distance of that past, the sense that an event was long ago or only recently, is itself something the brain assembles rather than reads off a meter. A vivid moment can feel close enough to touch, though years have passed, while a dull stretch of months can collapse into almost nothing, as if it had been edited out entirely. Sometimes the machinery slips in the other direction and shows its seams from the inside. There are moments when a brand new scene arrives, wrapped in the uncanny certainty that you have lived it before, that this exact instant is a repetition of something already filed away, though you know with equal certainty it cannot be. It is a small misfire in the system that tags experience as fresh or familiar. A moment where the sense of pastness gets stamped onto the present by mistake. The very fact that such a thing can happen is quietly devastating, because it reveals that the feeling of remembering is not the same as having remembered, that the brain can manufacture the sensation of a past out of nothing at all. The line you assume is solid, the line between what is happening now and what already happened, turns out to be one more thing your mind draws in. Another stroke of the editing. Another seam stitched with thread that is not there. So the order is constructed. The duration is constructed. The sense of cause flowing into effect is constructed. 3 layers of your experience of time, and all 3 turn out to be assembled rather than received. But surely the raw machinery underneath, the basic timing, is anchored to something steady. Your brain does have something like a rhythm, real oscillations, patterns of activity that cycle many times each second, and one of these rhythms appears closely tied to the refresh rate of conscious experience, the pace at which the brain samples the world, builds a frame, and shows it to you as now. If that rhythm were perfectly stable, you could at least argue that the underlying clockwork of time perception is fixed, a reliable biological metronome. But it is not stable at all. Under certain conditions, the synchronized firing that normally holds your sense of time together scatters and falls out of step. Some regions race ahead, others lag. The unified frame dissolves, and the felt experience of time stretches and warps along with it. Seconds can swell into what feels like long minutes, Deep states of focused attention can shift the felt pace of time as well, slowing it or quickening it. A sudden shock, a near accident, can flood the system and drive the sampling rate upward, packing more frames into each second, so that a brief event unfolds in vivid slow motion and feels far longer than the clock would ever admit. Your experience of time is not wired to the universe. It is wired to a frequency generated by tissue inside your skull, and that frequency can be bent by chemistry, by practice, by a sharp enough jolt of fear. Speed it up, and the world appears to slow. Slow it down, and the world appears to rush. The most certain feeling in your life is produced by an electrical rhythm that is anything but fixed. There is a more familiar proof of all this, one you have lived through without ever calling it strange. Think back to a single summer in childhood. It stretched out almost without end, a vast open country of long afternoons, each day a world unto itself. The distance between one birthday and the next feeling like an age. Now look at how the years move for you today. They blur. Whole seasons slip past almost unnoticed. You turn around and a year is simply gone. And you cannot quite say where it went. The clocks did not change. A year is the same measured span it always was. What changed is you, the rate at which your mind takes the world in and lays it down. To a child, almost everything is new, and the brain, drinking in a flood of first experiences, records the time densely, packing each day with so much that it feels enormous in memory. To an older mind, so much has become familiar that the days slide by lightly recorded, weeks compressing into a thin smear, because so little in them was new enough to mark. The felt length of your life is not measured by the clock at all. It is measured by how much your mind bothered to write down. That alone should tell you how loosely your experience of time is tethered to anything fixed. The very same hour can feel like a held breath, or like a slow eternity, depending entirely on what is happening inside you. An hour spent waiting, watching a door, listening for a sound that will not come, drags on until each minute feels swollen and cruel. The very same hour, lost in something you love, in work or music or the company of someone dear, vanishes before you notice it began, and you look up astonished that so much of the clock has moved. Fear can stretch a few seconds into a vivid eternity. Joy can swallow an evening whole. Boredom can make an afternoon feel like a punishment that will never end. And none of this is a flaw in your perception, some failure to read the true time correctly. It is a window straight into the truth that there is no single true time being misread. There is only the time your mind builds, and it builds a different one depending on what you feel. We move through our days quietly assuming we all share one steady current, that a minute is a minute for everyone, and a year is a year. And in a sense, measured against the cold count of atoms, it is, but measured against the only time you will ever actually live inside, the time your mind assembles and hands to you. No two stretches are ever truly equal, and no two people ever live the same amount of it, even when their clocks agree perfectly. The hours of your life are not coins of identical weight stacked in a neat column. They are wildly uneven, some swollen and luminous, some shrunken to almost nothing. And which is which depends not on the heavens or the equations, but on attention, on novelty, on love and fear and wonder. The thing you call the passage of your life is, in the end, the most personal creation you have, shaped by what you noticed and what you let slip past unrecorded. Two completely separate roads have now arrived at the same unsettling place. Look at time from the outside, through physics, and it dissolves into something that does not appear fundamental. Look at it from the inside, through the workings of the mind, and it turns out to be assembled, edited, manufactured, The outer view and the inner view agree. The only question left is whether there is some deeper level beneath both, a floor below physics and below the brain, where time finally turns out to be real. That deeper level is the world of the very small, the quantum realm, and if time is solid anywhere, it ought to be there. But when you go down to that level, something happens to the ordinary order of before and after that defies every instinct you have. There is a famous kind of experiment in which a single particle of light is sent toward a device that gives it two possible paths to travel. If you set things up to detect which path it took, you find a clean answer. It went one way, like a tiny ball choosing a road. But if instead you arrange the two paths so they meet again at the far end and combine, the particle behaves as though it had quietly traveled both routes at once, interfering with itself in a way that only makes sense if it never committed to a single path at all. So far, this is merely strange, the ordinary strangeness of the quantum world. The truly disturbing twist came when someone proposed making the choice of how to set up the experiment only after the particle had already entered and started traveling. The particle commits, or seems to commit, and then, while it is in transit, you decide which kind of experiment it is about to be part of, and when this was actually built and run. With the final choice made by a random process after the particle was already on its way, the results came out exactly as the strangest reading predicted. When the experiment was arranged one way, the particle had traveled both paths. When it was arranged the other way, the particle had traveled just one. The decision made after the particle entered determined what the particle had already done before that decision was made. Not nudged, not reinterpreted. Determined. This has been repeated again and again in laboratories around the world, and no explanation that keeps the comfortable order of cause before effect has survived. At the deepest level of physical reality, below atoms, below everything you can see or touch, the order of before and after is not fixed. In a real and measurable sense, the future reaches back and shapes the past. And the equipment that showed this fits on a tabletop. There is a still deeper layer of this strangeness, one that gnawed at even the greatest minds. Take two particles and link them in a particular way, then carry them far apart, and measure a property of each. The results turn out to be perfectly coordinated, every single time, no matter how vast the distance between them. Measure one and find it leaning a certain way, and the other, however far off, is always found leaning the matching way. You might think they simply agreed on their answers in advance, like two coins struck from the same press. But it was proved, rigorously, that no such advance agreement can reproduce what the experiments actually show. The coordination is too perfect, too sharp, to come from any hidden arrangement made before they parted. The only way nature produces these results is if the two particles are connected in a way that involves no signal passing between them at all. Nothing crosses the gap. No light, no force, no wave, no message. The coordination simply exists instantly across any distance. One of the greatest physicists who ever lived recoiled from this, calling it a spooky action at a distance, and spent his later years insisting it must mean the theory was incomplete, that some hidden machinery had to be lurking underneath to restore sanity. But the hidden machinery was ruled out, on paper and then in the laboratory, and the highest honor in physics was eventually awarded for the experiments that settled the matter for good. The connection is real. It does not travel through space. It does not travel through time. It exists outside both. Two particles separated by an entire galaxy could respond to one another, with no moment passing in between. Not faster than light, which would still happen inside time. This is something stranger. The link does not use time at all. And if that connection does not need time in order to exist, then perhaps the question should be flipped on its head. Perhaps time needs that connection. There is a daring idea, proposed by leading theorists, that two phenomena long thought to live in completely different corners of physics: the deep connection between distant particles and the idea of tunnels threaded through the fabric of space, are secretly one and the same thing seen from two angles. If that is right, then the consequence is staggering. The fabric of space and time would not be the stage on which these quantum connections play out. The fabric would be built out of those connections. Space and time would not be the container holding the web of correlations. They would be what the web looks like when there is enough of it, woven densely enough to resemble distance and duration. Time would not produce the connections. The connections would produce time. The thing you assumed was the foundation turns out to be the product, and the thing you assumed was a curious detail turns out to be the foundation. If time really is built out of these deeper connections, there ought to be a way to show precisely how the experience of time can emerge from something that does not itself contain it. And there is such an idea, so clean it almost feels like sleight of hand. Imagine the universe as a single, complete, closed system, with nothing outside it. There is no clock hanging on some external wall of the cosmos, ticking off seconds from beyond. And a complete, closed system that contains absolutely everything is described, in the deepest theory we have, by a single total state that does not change. Because change would mean being different from one moment to the next. And a moment requires a reference outside the system. And there is no outside. Taken as a whole, the universe is static, not frozen in time, because there is no time for it to be frozen in. Now do one thing. Divide the system in two. Call one small part the clock, and the rest everything else. Let the clock relate to everything else. The connections between those two parts, the way their states are bound together, begin to look exactly like change. From inside, the clock part registers a before and an after, a gap, a flow. From outside the whole, there is none. And you have never once stood outside. You cannot. You are woven into everything around you, one part of the universe regarding another part. The gap you call a second, the current you call the present, is not the universe moving. It is what it looks like when a fragment tries to measure the whole from within and mistakes the measurement for a river. This is not only philosophy. When physicists wrote down the deepest equation they could for the entire universe at once, joining the theory of the very small to the theory of the very large, the result was a single line that described everything. Every particle and field and force, all of it folded into one expression. And that equation has a startling feature. The symbol for time is not in it. Not because anyone forgot it. Not because the mathematics was simplified for convenience. When you write the quantum description of a closed system that contains everything, the mathematics simply does not produce a time variable. It is not hidden in some corner waiting to be teased out. It is absent. The equation describes a universe in which, taken as a whole, nothing happens, where the very idea of happening does not apply, where everything simply is, all at once, always. This has been an open wound in physics for more than half a century. It is not a footnote. It is the central obstacle to joining the two greatest theories we have. One of them is built on time, needs time, bends and stretches time. The other, applied to the whole universe, erases it, producing a description in which the word when has no meaning. Both theories have been confirmed to staggering precision. One insists time must exist. The other says it does not. And no one has found the way to reconcile them. Some thinkers took that absence as the answer, rather than the problem. One prominent figure argued, in effect, that we should simply let go of time. His reasoning runs like this. When you have complete information about a system, knowing the exact state of every part, you do not need time at all. You can describe the whole thing as a web of relationships. This quantity tied to that quantity. This state connected to that one, with no before and no after. Just a network of relations. Time only sneaks in when your information is incomplete, when you cannot track every microscopic detail, and are forced to describe things in terms of averages and probabilities. In that blurred statistical description, a quantity appears that behaves like time, increasing, giving a direction, letting you speak of change and sequence and duration. But it is not fundamental. It is a side effect of your ignorance. Time, in this view, is the name we give to not being able to see the finest threads of reality. Sharpen the vision enough, gain complete knowledge, and the blur vanishes, and time vanishes with it. It is not that we cannot find time at the deepest level. It is that time is the word we use for being unable to see the deepest level. The thing you feel in every breath would then be not a feature of reality, but a feature of the limits of your view. Another thinker went further still and removed even what the first had left behind. If you strip away time but keep change, you still have relationships shifting, correlations existing, a web with structure even without a clock above it. This second thinker proposed taking away the change as well. In his picture, the universe is not a sequence of events at all. It is a vast collection of complete arrangements, snapshots, each one a full configuration of every particle in existence, a single frozen frame containing everything. And these frames do not follow one after another. There is no first and second and third. There is no order, no progression, only an immense space of all possible arrangements, every one of them simply existing. The arrangement where you are reading this, the arrangement where you set this aside 5 minutes ago, the arrangement where you were never born, all of them present, none more real than any other, none before or after any other. And here is the part that tightens the chest. Some of these arrangements contain structures that look exactly like records of a past, a brain full of memories, a fossil pressed into stone, an old photograph on a shelf, light from a distant star that seems to have traveled an age to arrive. These structures sit inside the frame, part of the snapshot. And your brain, also inside the frame, looks at them and concludes there must have been a past, a sequence, a long reel of events leading up to this instant. But in this picture there is no reel and no projector. There are only the snapshots, and on some of them are painted images of projectors. Your memories would not be recordings of things that happened. They would be features of the single configuration you exist in. The feeling that time passed, that yesterday was real, that you were once a child, would be a pattern inside a frozen frame rather than a report from a vanished past. This thinker is not saying the past is gone. He is saying the past was never there to begin with. There was no sequence. There is only this, and this is not a moment in time, but a configuration that happens to contain the appearance of time within its own structure. But not everyone surrendered time so easily, and one voice insisted, loudly, on the exact opposite. Where others said time was an illusion, a fog, a painting of a river that never flows, this thinker argued that time is the only thing that is truly real, and that everything else is built from it. In his view, even the laws of physics are not fixed and eternal. They evolve. They drift. The familiar constants we treat as carved into the universe might shift across vast ages. The rules you learn describe the universe in its present phase, but they were different before, and may be different again. The one thing that survives across all that change is time itself. The container, while everything else is contents that come and go. And the stakes between these positions are brutal, because they cannot all be right, and each one costs you something you depend on. If time is an illusion, and the deep laws are timeless and fixed, you gain a beautiful, stable foundation, but you lose your own motion through the world. Frozen into a web of relations your brain mistakes for a flowing stream. If even motion and change are illusions, you become a pattern inside a still photograph that merely contains the painted suggestion of a projector. And if time is the one real thing, then the laws themselves become temporary. The constant's no longer constant. The foundation shifting under your feet while you try to stand on it. There is no option in this hallway that opens onto solid ground. Every door opens onto a different kind of fall. For a long time, this could all be waved away as theory, equations on paper, arguments between brilliant people in rooms full of chalk dust. You could insist that the real universe out there, made of rock and fire and light, simply runs the way it always has. But there are places in that real universe where time visibly stops behaving. When enough mass is crushed into a small enough space, the geometry of space and time bends so steeply that nothing can climb back out. Not matter, not light, not even information. The edge where escape becomes impossible is a one-way boundary, and what happens to time at that edge is profoundly strange. Imagine watching something fall towards such an object from a safe distance. As it approaches the boundary, you see its clock running slower and slower, its motions growing sluggish, the light it gives off sliding toward red, and then deeper red, and then fading out entirely. From where you stand, it never quite crosses the line. It hangs there at the edge, its clock creeping toward a stop it never reaches, frozen at the threshold for what looks like forever. But shift to the perspective of the falling thing itself, and it feels nothing unusual at all. No wall, no barrier, no sign that anything has changed. It crosses the boundary smoothly and keeps falling, its own clock ticking along as normal, never noticing the line at all. Two observers. One sees something frozen at the edge of time for eternity. The other feels nothing and falls straight through. Both are right. The universe does not pick a winner. Time is not simply slowing at that edge. It is splitting into two accounts that will never again agree. What lies beyond that boundary is stranger still. Inside, the very roles of space and time trade places in the mathematics. Outside, you can move freely through space in any direction you choose, while time carries you forward whether you like it or not. The one direction you cannot reverse. Inside, that arrangement flips. Moving toward the center is no longer a journey through space you might refuse. It becomes as inescapable as the forward march of time was outside. You do not get pulled toward the center by some force you might resist. You move toward it the way you once moved into the future, with no other direction available to you. And that path has an end. Under the right conditions, the collapse leads to a point where the curvature of space and time climbs without limit, where the known laws stop producing meaningful answers, and instead return only infinities, which in mathematics is another way of saying the description has broken and the law no longer applies. At that point, time does not slow down or even stop. It ceases to be a meaningful idea at all. There is no after. There is no next moment. Because next requires time, and time is precisely what has just ended. You would not be falling toward a place so much as toward the edge of the last moment, the final tick, the point where the clock does not merely stop, but ceases to exist, and you reach it not because anything drags you there, but because the structure inside leaves you no other direction to go. And these objects are not permanent. They slowly leak away. At the finest level, pairs of particles are forever flickering into being and vanishing again throughout empty space, normally annihilating each other an instant later with nothing gained or lost. But right at the edge of one of these objects, something different can happen. A pair appears at the boundary. One member slips inside while the other escapes, carrying a trace of energy away. Bit by bit, the object loses a sliver of its mass, and over spans of time so long they make the present age of the universe look like nothing, it shrinks and finally vanishes altogether. And that raises a problem that has tormented physics for decades. Everything that ever fell in carried information about itself, its makeup, its structure, its history. All of that crossed the boundary and headed toward the place where time ends. Then the object evaporates and leaves behind only a faint, featureless glow. So where did the information go? If it was destroyed, then a sacred principle of the deepest theory is broken. The rule that information is never truly lost, that you can always in principle reconstruct what went in from what comes out. If instead the information survived, it had to get out somehow, and yet the boundary lets nothing escape. That is the whole definition. The puzzle has stayed open for half a century, the finest minds circling it without resolution. Time ends inside. The object that held the time evaporates. The information that fell into that time does not vanish. The thing dies, and what it contained does not, and no one can fully explain how that is possible. You might tell yourself this has nothing to do with you, that these are distant monsters at the far edge of the cosmos, exotic problems for specialists. But one of these objects sits at the very center of the galaxy you live in, millions of times the mass of our star, and an image of its surroundings has actually been captured. Not a painting, not a simulation, a real observation. It is not at the edge of the universe. It is at the heart of your own galaxy, and everything you have ever seen in the night sky circles it. Our star circles it. Your planet circles it. You are circling it right now, sweeping along at a tremendous pace, completing one enormous loop over a span so long that the last time the solar system stood where it stands today, the most familiar creatures of deep prehistory had not yet appeared. And at the center of that orbit, inside the object, everything you know is wheeling around. The same mathematics that quietly corrects the clocks in your navigation system says that time runs down to zero. Not in a thought experiment. In the same equations that guide a car to an airport, you are bound, by gravity, to an object where time does not exist. And you have been circling it your whole life, as has everyone who has ever lived. The distance feels safe. But distance is only space, and you are tied to that object not through space, but through gravity. The same gravity that nudges a satellite's clock by millionths of a second a day, only carried to its absolute extreme. You are not far from the end of time. You are on a tether attached to it. Time breaks at the center of such an object, but that is a single point, a local failure, a crack in the floor of one particular room. The harder question is whether the whole floor is failing, whether time has a limit not just in one place, but everywhere. Long ago, a careful mind followed the law of growing disorder to its ultimate conclusion. If disorder always increases, if gradients always flatten, and differences always fade, then eventually there is nothing left to even out. Every region reaches the same temperature, every part the same energy, and nothing flows, nothing changes, nothing happens. The universe settles into a perfect, featureless calm, sometimes called its final cold equilibrium. It is not a collapse or an explosion. It is the opposite, a state so uniform that the word event loses its content. And think what that means for time. If time is the measure of change, and the direction of time is the direction of growing disorder. Then when disorder has nowhere left to grow, there is no more change to measure, and no direction left to point. The arrow arrives at its target and finds nothing on the far side. Time does not exactly stop, which would imply something still there to be stopped. It empties out. The word passes loses its meaning, because there is nothing left to pass. The container may remain, but the contents are gone, and you are left with a universe that exists yet, in which nothing, time included, has anything left to do. And the future is rushing toward that emptiness faster than anyone expected. Careful observations of distant exploding stars revealed that the universe is not merely expanding, but accelerating. The spaces between galaxies stretching wider at an ever-quickening rate, driven by something we can see the effects of, but cannot yet name. What it does is separate everything from everything else. Right now, the reachable universe holds an enormous number of galaxies you could point a telescope at and study. But they are drifting away, and drifting faster every year. In the far future, every galaxy beyond our own small local cluster will recede so quickly, carried off by the stretching of space itself, that its light will never reach us again. Not with a better instrument, not ever. The photons will race toward us forever, and never arrive. Those galaxies will not explode or collapse. They will simply become invisible, permanently. And the sky will slowly go dark, not all at once, but star by star, galaxy by galaxy. In the deep future, a watcher on whatever remains of our world would look up and see our own galaxy and nothing else. A single island in an endless black ocean, with no evidence that anything else had ever been there. The light would be gone, the records gone, and no measurement and no theory could ever prove the ocean had once held other islands. The universe will not end in a bang of collapse. It will end in forgetting. Everything beyond reach erased from the record as though it had never been, while time still passes, with nothing left for it to carry. It is worth walking that long, unraveling slowly, because the scale of it is part of the terror and part of the strange beauty. Picture the cosmos far ahead of where we stand, not in thousands of years or millions, but in stretches so vast that the entire history of life on our world is less than a single breath against them. First, the bright young stars burn through their fuel and die, and no new ones rise to take their places once the raw material runs thin. The great glowing nurseries where stars are born fall dark and cold. For an age the dim embers linger, the faint, long-lived stars that sip their fuel so slowly they can outlast 1,000 brilliant ones, glowing a sullen red against a deepening black. But even they go out in the end. One by one the last fires gutter and fail, and the universe enters a long night with no dawn behind it. Then comes an age of corpses and remnants, the dense burnt-out husks of dead stars drifting in the dark, the silent dark objects that swallowed everything near them, the cold cinders of worlds that once might have held oceans and weather, and perhaps more. Across spans of time that dwarf everything that came before, even matter itself may slowly come undone. The very particles that build every atom in your body unraveling at a pace so gradual it would take numbers no tongue has words for. The dead stars crumble, the planets dissolve. Whatever structure remains thins out and scatters, until the cosmos is a vast, near-empty darkness, sprinkled with the faintest debris, drifting ever further apart, as the relentless stretching of space carries every island beyond the sight of every other. And then, at the very end of this descent, even the great dark objects that devoured so much begin to fade, leaking their substance away in the faintest possible glow across spans of time so enormous the mind simply slides off them. when the last of them has evaporated, there is nothing left but a thin, cold haze spread evenly through an unimaginable emptiness. The same temperature everywhere, with no difference anywhere between one place and another. No structure, no event, no flicker of change to mark one instant from the next. And this is the part that turns the spine cold. In such a state, time would still, in some technical sense, be passing, but there would be nothing whatsoever for it to do. No process to measure, no change to count, no before to tell apart from any after. The river would still be there, in theory, but every ripple and current would be gone, leaving a flat, featureless stillness, in which the very idea of one moment differing from the next quietly loses all content. The universe would not have been destroyed. It would simply have run all the way down. Every difference spent, every gradient flattened, every story told and finished, with time left holding nothing at all. And the block universe makes that ending stranger still. If the four-dimensional structure is real, then the cold and empty future is not waiting up ahead. It is not an event still to come. It is a region, sitting in the very same structure that contains this moment. Picture a long road. You stand in the middle. Far to one side it runs to a bright city, far to the other it fades into desert, and both the city and the desert exist right now, neither of them waiting to come into being as you approach. The block universe says the same of time. The fiery beginning is a region. Your life is a region. The cold ending is a region. All of them parts of one four-dimensional object, none more real than any other, none of them waiting. The death of the universe is not something that will eventually happen to you. It is already there in the structure, at the same level of reality as this very sentence. You are not traveling toward it. You are beside it. The sense that it lies far away is a feature of where your thread sits inside the structure. From outside, there is no distance between now and the end, no between at all. The beginning and the end are neighboring regions of a single object, like the first and last pages of a book already printed and bound. You are not reading toward the last page. It is already written, already there, as certain as the page you are on. You do not live before the end of time. You live beside it, and yet even the ending may not be the end. There is a striking idea that the final cold emptiness and a fresh beginning might be the same thing seen twice. The reasoning runs like this. In the far future, after everything has decayed and faded, the only things left would be massless particles racing at the speed of light. And such a particle has a peculiar property. It does not experience time at all. Its internal clock does not tick. For it, the instant of departure and the instant of arrival are the same instant. A universe made entirely of such particles would be a universe in which nothing has a working clock. And without a clock, the cosmos loses the ability to measure scale at all. Distance and size lose their meaning. The difference between unimaginably vast and unimaginably small dissolves. And in that strange condition, an endlessly spread out, cold, empty universe becomes mathematically indistinguishable from an impossibly compressed, hot, dense beginning. The numbers match. The geometry matches. The cold death of one age and the fiery birth of the next become the same description. The transition needs no energy, no mechanism, no time, because time is precisely the thing that has lost all meaning. One age fades out, the next emerges, and there is no real boundary between them, because a boundary would require a scale, and scale is exactly what disappeared. In this picture, time does not end and does not begin. It loses itself and starts again with no memory of what came before, and you could never know which cycle this is, because the very word which assumes a sequence, and here there is no sequence, only a structure that has forgotten itself so completely that forgetting and beginning become the same act. There is an even older and stranger question hiding underneath all of this, one that has unsettled people for as long as anyone has looked up and wondered. Did time itself have a beginning? We are so used to asking what came before that the question feels automatic, almost impossible to suppress. Before the cup was on the table, it was in the cupboard. Before the tree, there was a seed. Every effect trails a cause behind it like a shadow, and the mind insists on following that chain back and back, expecting it to run forever. But if time itself began, then the word before loses all meaning at that edge. To ask what came before the beginning of time is like asking what lies north of the northernmost point. The question has the shape of a sensible question. The grammar is intact, and yet there is no place for the answer to live. There is no earlier, because earlier is a direction that only exists once time is already running. The chain of causes does not stretch back into an endless dark. It arrives at a place where the very idea of back stops applying. This is almost impossible to truly hold in the mind, because the mind is built by time, soaked in it, incapable of imagining its own absence. We can say the words, a state with no before, a boundary beyond which there is no earlier, and we can move the symbols around correctly. But we cannot feel it, cannot picture it, any more than we can picture a color we have never seen. Every attempt smuggles time back in through the back door. We imagine a great darkness waiting, a silent emptiness before the first instant, and we do not notice that we have already cheated, because a waiting darkness is itself a stretch of time, a before dressed up as nothing. The honest version refuses even that. Not a long emptiness preceding the start, but no preceding at all. The start is the floor of the basement. There is no further down. And the mind, reaching for one more step, finds only the assumption that there must be a step, an assumption that comes from us and not from the thing itself. And the same vertigo waits at the far end. If time can have an edge where it begins, can it have an edge where it ends? A final instant with no after, in just the way the first instant had no before. The same refusal of the imagination applies. We cannot help but picture a quiet afterward, a stillness following the last moment, and once again we have cheated. Because an afterward is more time, smuggled in to soften a truth the mind cannot swallow. A genuine end of time would not be followed by emptiness. It would not be followed by anything, because following is what time does, and time would be the thing that stopped. The beginning with no before, and the end with no after, are not far apart in the way two distant places are far apart. They are two faces of the same impossibility, the same wall the mind keeps walking into, the same place where our most basic habit of thought, the habit of always asking what is next and what came first, runs out of ground to stand on. Theories can argue endlessly, but experiments are harder to dismiss, and in recent decades the laboratory has returned results that strike at the most basic assumption your mind makes about reality, the assumption that causes come before effects. In one careful experiment, a particle of light enters a device. A choice about how to treat it is made by a random process, only after it has already entered and committed to its journey. And the particle's earlier behavior turns out to depend on that later choice. The pattern that reveals whether it behaved as one thing or another either exists or it does not, and its existence is controlled by a decision not yet made at the time the pattern is being formed. A choice in the future fixing a fact in the past, not a vague maybe but a sharp, measurable result, reproduced again and again, with no explanation that preserves the ordinary order of cause and effect ever surviving the data. In another, more elaborate version, the information about which path a particle took is recorded and the particle's mark is set down, and only afterward is a choice made about whether to erase that path information or keep it. When it is erased, a telltale pattern appears in the already recorded data. When it is kept, the pattern is gone. The past record did not change. Something stranger is true. The past held both possibilities at once, and the later choice selected which one had been real all along. The past is not a single fixed record. It is a blend of possibilities, and the future is what settles which version actually happened. And there is a result more disorienting still. One that does not merely reverse the order of two events, but removes the order entirely. Imagine two operations, and in ordinary experience one must come before the other, even if you do not know which. There is always an order, but by placing the controlling part of the system into a quantum blend, experimenters created a situation in which one operation happens before the other and after the other at the same time. The causal order itself suspended in a superposition. This is not a matter of interpretation. The arrangement produces a real, measurable advantage that is simply impossible under any fixed order, an advantage you cannot reproduce by doing one first, or the other first, or by flipping a coin to choose. It exists only when the order itself is left undefined. The before and after of two events is not, at the deepest level, a fixed fact about the world. It is something more like a quantity that takes on a value only when you measure it, undefined until then, as fluid as the position of a particle. So nearly everything points one way. Time has no definition. Its direction is a statistical accident resting on an unexplained beginning. The present moment is personal, dependent on your speed and your height. Your brain manufactures the flow. The deepest experiments fracture the order of cause and effect. The best equation for the whole universe has no time in it. Time ends physically at the center of objects you orbit. The cosmos drifts toward a state where time has nothing left to do. Almost every thread leads to the same conclusion: that time is not fundamental. There is one slender thread that points the other way. A single process, observed in a rare type of particle decay, in which the symmetry between forward and backward in time is genuinely, measurably broken. For a long time it was thought that the deepest laws treated both directions of time identically, and very nearly they do. But here, in this one narrow corner, a real asymmetry appears, a faint preference for one direction written into fundamental law. And yet the size of it is what matters. It shows up in one type of decay of one type of particle, at the level of a fraction of a percent, while every other process in all of physics remains perfectly reversible. The arrow you feel every single day, the one that cools your coffee and ages your cells and forms your memories, has no connection to that tiny crack. The only place in all of fundamental physics where time shows a genuine direction is in a sliver of one rare process, and the entire rest of the universe is silent on the question. The arrow you live inside has no explanation at the level of law. It has only the explanation from statistics, and the statistics rest on a beginning no one can justify. We end up standing exactly where that lonely researcher stood when he first stared into the hole. Except now we know how deep it goes. There is a reason the question has never been answered, and it is not for lack of effort. The two theories that describe reality with the greatest precision ever achieved disagree, at the root, about what time even is. One treats time as dynamic, something that bends and stretches and slows near great masses, part of the very fabric of reality, shaped by the matter and energy within it. Time, in that view, is a player in the drama. The other treats time as a fixed backdrop, sitting outside the system, never bending, ticking at a steady rate while events unfold upon it. Both theories have passed every test thrown at them, predicting the motions of worlds and the behavior of the smallest things to astonishing accuracy. And they cannot both be right about time. Time cannot be both flexible and fixed, both part of the fabric and external to it, both bending and not bending. To unite them, to write the single law that contains both, you have to decide what time is. That is the great unsolved problem at the frontier, open for the better part of a century. Brilliant approaches have been tried. Some produced vast landscapes of possible answers, with no way to choose among them. Others removed time altogether, and then could not recover the smooth, familiar world we actually live in. Generation after generation has worked at it. In that same span, science split the atom, walked on the moon, read the human genetic code, heard the ripples of distant collisions in the fabric of space, and captured the shadow of one of those great dark objects. And on the question of what time is, it has made no progress at all. Not slow progress. None. And the people who have gone furthest do not even agree with one another. One says the world is not made of things that persist, but of events and processes with no duration, only relations. And that time is the fog that keeps us from seeing all those relations at once. Clear the fog, he says, and time vanishes, leaving a still, complete, timeless web. Another says it is more radical than that not only time but motion and change are illusions, that there are only frozen configurations, each a complete universe unto itself, none joined to any other by sequence. Your sense of flow merely a feature of the snapshot you happen to inhabit, like a river painted on a canvas that has never once moved. A third says the opposite of both, that time is the only thing that is truly real, that space and the laws and the constants are all derived from it, and all of them change. The rules themselves drifting across the ages. 3 of the sharpest minds in the field, 3 answers that cannot all be true, and not one of them leaves your ordinary picture of reality standing. Choose the first, and you lose time. Choose the second, and you lose time, and motion, and change together. Choose the third, and you keep time, but lose the solid ground beneath every law ever written. These are their careful, published positions. But there is a difference between what a person writes for the record and what they admit when asked how the whole thing makes them feel. One of the most prominent voices in the field, asked plainly, conceded that we do not know whether time is fundamental, and that he is not confident we will know for decades to come. That is not a minor figure hedging. That is someone at the very center of the subject saying, openly, that the question is stuck. Another, the one who wrote the idea that strips time out of the deepest equations, confessed that when he genuinely contemplates the possibility that time does not exist, he feels a kind of physical vertigo, an actual dizziness. The man whose own work removes time grows lightheaded at the thought that his work might be right. A third wrote, in the reflective passages where the calculating stops, that the question of the nature of time is the question on which everything else depends. That whether we can understand the universe at all hangs on whether we can understand time, and that we do not understand it. 3 people who have gone further than anyone, and when you ask them not what they think but what they feel, the answer is the same. Vertigo, uncertainty, silence. They are not hiding the answer. They are standing at the edge of a cliff, peering down, and they cannot see the bottom. There is something almost vertiginous in noticing how smoothly the world keeps running on top of all this confusion. Engineers synchronize networks across continents to fractions of a second. Navigation systems guide millions of journeys a day by correcting for the bending of time they do not pretend to fully understand. Whole industries, whole civilizations, are built on the flawless practical handling of a thing whose nature no one can state. It is as if humanity learned to ride a wave perfectly, while never once being able to say what water is. We schedule our lives, keep our appointments, measure our ages, mourn our losses, and mark our beginnings, all in the confident language of a thing that dissolves the moment you ask it to hold still and explain itself. The competence is total. The comprehension is missing. And most people pass their entire lives inside that gap without ever feeling its edges, because the surface holds so well that you never suspect there is no floor beneath it. Only when you stop and press on the question directly, the way the quietest researchers have spent their lives pressing on it, does the surface flex, and the strange truth seeps up through the seams, that we have organized everything around a current whose source we have never found. So now you know why the people who study time most deeply have grown so quiet about it. It is not that they refuse to explain. It is that there may be nothing there to explain. What they found at the bottom is not an answer, but an absence where an answer was supposed to be. And an absence is harder to put into words than any fact. Everything laid out here is, as far as we can tell, true. Time has no definition, and the greatest minds across thousands of years could not write one. Its direction is not a law, but a consequence of a beginning no one can account for, balanced on a probability so small, the number describing it will not fit inside the universe it created. The present moment does not exist in the structure of reality. It belongs to you and to no one else, shaped by your speed and your altitude. Your brain does not observe time so much as build it, faking the order, faking the duration, faking the link between cause and effect, then presenting the whole seamless construction to you, as if it were live, with the seams hidden and the thread invisible. At the deepest level, the future helps fix the past, and the order of cause and effect can be left undefined. The finest equation we have for the whole universe carries no symbol for time. Time fails completely at the center of an object you have orbited every day of your life. And the cosmos drifts toward a state in which time has nothing left to do. And yet, here is the part that all the equations leave out. The part worth holding on to when the ground feels thin. You are here, right now, whatever now turns out to mean. Whatever you turns out to mean in a reality where every moment may already exist. Something in you is turning these marks into meaning. Something is experiencing this, processing it, feeling the weight of it. And that something does not wait for permission from physics to exist. The question of what time is may never be answered. The floor may never be found. The cliff may have no bottom at all. But you are still standing on it. You are still breathing. You still have things you mean to do, places you mean to go, people you hope to become, and not one of those needs the mystery solved first. None of it is on hold until the equations make up their minds. Whatever time is or is not, you have been given some of it, and the only thing that has never been in doubt across this entire strange journey is that this stretch of it, the part you are living through at this very instant, is yours to spend. So do not spend it frightened of what time is. Spend it. Reach for the things that matter to you. Build what you were meant to build. Be gentle with yourself on the days the ground feels especially thin. The mystery can stay unsolved, and you can still live fully inside it, which is, in the end, the one thing every version of this story agrees that you are truly doing. Whatever time is, it is carrying you somewhere. And the least you can do is choose, with open eyes, how you ride it.